Way not, I guess. As always, I'm your host, Aaron, and today I'm joined by Glenn Van Peski. Did I pronounce that right, Glenn?
You did. It sounds better with
Perfect.
your accent, but yeah, that's correct.
The Welsh accent.
Yeah.
Can you tell people a little bit about yourself, please, Glenn?
Sure. Was born in Southern California in the US. Was lucky enough to grow up as a free range kid, before the internet was invented. We were just outside all the time. It was pretty fun. Parents got divorced when I was in fourth grade, moved back to Western Massachusetts in the middle of winter. That was a big shock. Um, when I graduated from high school, I rode my bicycle across the country. And the US is a big country, it's 4,200 miles, and been on the West Coast ever since. I started working, went to college, got married, was almost killed in a plane crash, accidentally started a gear company, and retired and wrote a book.
Nice. Talk to me about that bike ride then, Glenn, because I did a bike ride, London to Paris. I couldn't tell you the distances, to be fair, but I did London to Paris, and I loved it. It was great, but it was a slog at the same time.
Yeah, well, like I think probably most things in life, there's parts that are a slog, and there's the magic that happens along the way. And I have no idea why. I wasn't a particularly adventurous high schooler. I have no idea how I got it into my brain that this would be something fun to do. Um, and of course, it's pre-internet, so there's no way to research it. We just got a gas station map and paper map and started pedaling. Pointed west and started pedaling. It was crazy, um, but it was a great time. I mean, to be 17 when we left, and no cell phones, no way to be in touch with my mom or anything. I think I called her from payphone like twice in the 6 or 7 weeks it took us to ride across the country. And we had some great experiences. Met some just super friendly people along the way. There was a lot. One guy kept a journal. I did not. Again, I don't know what I was thinking. Um, Apparently, looking over his journal, it rained a lot more than I remember. So that was kind of the slog part of that journey, I guess. But yeah, that was a great adventure. Still, probably to this day, my longest continuous adventure. And thanks to the magic of the internet, I am in touch with those three guys, and we're talking about next year, the 50th anniversary, doing the bike trip going the other way. So we'll see. We'll see if that comes to fruition.
Love that. I think you should go for it. Big fan of that.
And maybe you want to come with us.
Oh, I don't know. I haven't been on a bike for years, but that would be a challenge.
Yeah, it's a bunch of 70-year-old guys. I think you could probably hold your own.
We'll see. We'll see. I don't know. I'm carrying a bit of holiday weight still. You know what I mean? I haven't shifted it yet.
Yeah, they got wheels. It's like I'm already in looking at the guys. It seems like two of us look kind of like we did 50 years ago in terms of general frame. Two of us do not. Um, and the guys have already said, a couple of guys have already said, like, hey, I'm not sleeping on the ground this time. It's going to be hotels. And there's even some talk of e-bikes for one or two of them. But yeah,
Yeah, that's a
we'll
good
see.
way to do it, though, isn't it? That's
I don't
smart.
know. Then you get a charge, and I like sleeping in the dirt. That's kind of part of the point for me. But we'll see.
Fair one. To be fair, when you said about the initial bike ride, it made me think about Forrest Gump a bit, where he just goes out running. He just one day just decided, screw it, let's go across the country on a bike.
You know, I should. I don't know if I was. I don't think I was journaling back then. Actually, maybe I was. I'll have to dig up my old journals and see if there's any hints to like how this idea popped into my brain. I don't know.
It's
Who
a good
knows?
one though, and like you said, it's a good experience in it to look back on to have done that because it's no mean feat. That's it takes some doing.
Yeah, of course. In some ways, not having the internet, we couldn't waste time planning it. It's like you figure out the gear and then it's like you just go and figure it out along the way. And yeah, no, it was great. Huh?
There you go. They're off already. The dogs. I did tell you, didn't I?
Uh,
See, they're off.
that could be your show signature, like guess
Yeah.
how many times the dogs are going to go off.
It could be a lot. It could be a lot. It depends what kind of mood they're in. But we'll see. We'll see. Sorry about that.
No
I can't
problem.
promise you it'll be the last time either, Glenn.
That's fine. I like dogs.
Yeah, they're all right. They're all right. They need to be trained better, really. I'm a bit soft with them. That's a problem.
Yeah, it depends on the dog. Our son has a rescue. It's a Goburian, they call it, half golden, half Siberian Husky, and he's a beautiful dog, very stubborn. So it's like you talk about training dogs. It's like, yeah, good luck with some breeds. I don't know.
Yeah, well, the Basset Hound, he's very stubborn. Very, very stubborn. You can't get him to do nothing he doesn't want to do. Even just going out for a wee at night before bed. Honestly, you have to drag him outside. He just doesn't want to go.
Uh, oh well.
Yeah, but what can you do? What can you do? So then, after your bike ride in high school, what did you do then?
Well, I was out here staying with my dad after the bike ride, and a friend of his. I didn't really have any plan, which seems weird. I'm kind of a planner as an engineer, but I don't know. Back then, it's like I didn't have a plan for. Wasn't planning to go to college, um, and I liked languages in high school. I took Latin, Greek, and French, and had some vague thought of being an interpreter or something without really knowing what was entailed. I probably would have sucked at it. Actually, it's a lot more work than I think I imagined. Um, so I was staying with my dad, kind of hanging out for a while until I guess I was going to go back to Massachusetts. And friends of his had a small civil engineering business, and they were looking for a draftsman. And they knew my dad was really smart, and they figured I was probably could put a pen to paper. So they offered me a job for $3.50 an hour, which is more money than I had ever heard of back then. So I said yes.
Nice. To be fair, you say about not having a plan. I still don't know what I want to be when I grow up, so I wouldn't worry too much about it.
For someone, I did get more like intentional as I got older about kind of thinking vaguely about things. But I think there's a balance, even if you generally have a plan or direction, to not get so locked on that you miss opportunities, because they weren't really part of the plan. Because, when I think about how much of my life has hinged on like a single event or like a chain of random events that weren't really on my radar, it's like I would have missed out on a lot if I just like had a plan and was executing it.
Yeah, I get that. I mean, if somebody who's kind of wandered his way through life, which is how I would describe it, with having no plan, but equally, there is a balance to it, and I do think you need that little bit of kind of freedom and exploration to kind of you know, find the right thing for you and find your kind of, I don't know, your peace, your happiness, maybe.
Yeah. And even, when you've found your contentment, that doesn't mean there isn't something else that could be interesting to pursue, people you haven't met or I don't know, just things you could explore. Like I just found out, I'm excited about this. We had a friend of my wife, Francie's, visiting us, and she makes her own ricotta cheese, and it's like super easy. And I make my own bread. I roast my own coffee. Um, so now I'm excited to try something else. And that wasn't like I didn't think like, yeah, one day I want to make my own cheese. It's like, but it's a cool opportunity.
Yeah, that's it, and I think especially meeting people from kind of different places, different walks of life, and kind of things like that, who have different interests. If you're relatively open minded, it can open up completely new experiences, new things, and kind of change the way you look at life in general. Really.
Yeah, and it's nice to to do that because you can get caught up in like just hanging out with a bunch of people that kind of look and think like you, and you miss out on a lot that way. I really like our neighborhood we're in. It's got alleys, and so everyone walks up and down the alleys, and we've got, other retired guys that are always available to play, go skiing or biking. Um, but we've got lots of families with young kids that like to come over and show you their art projects, and are excited to tell you how to make an envelope out of a sheet of paper, or talk about whatever's on their brains at that moment. And so it's fun to have that mix. I think it makes life more exciting, and I'm always interested when people different than me show up in my life. It's like, oh, this could be interesting. You know,
Yeah, same. I'm very much like that. I've kind of different people kind of really make me think differently. I'm quite open-minded, so I quite kind of like to learn like about different things and different ways of thinking, different ways to do stuff. I'm really interested in that kind of stuff. So it is definitely good when you get people who don't think like you, because I feel like if you do, is that whole echo chamber thing in it, like they talk about on social media, because that's the problem with social media a bit. The algorithm shows you all the stuff that you already like and kind of reinforces ideas and then polarizes you even more from people, rather than kind of showing you new ideas, new things, new ways of thinking, kind of new people to connect with. Is slightly different.
you know what they need? They need like an algorithm that you could like opt into that would just give you random stuff that from people not like you. Like you could call it the "they not like us" algorithm. That
Love that.
you sign in for it, and it's like, okay, you're this like old white guy, so I'm going to send you stuff from people that are not like you, because and some of it you won't like, but some of it's going to be good for you, and you're going to make some new friends and hear some new ideas.
Yeah. I think people are just kind of afraid to have their ideas challenged, aren't they? They get comfortable with kind of, I know this is how my life is, this is my outlook, and people get kind of comfortable with that. But I think it's always important to kind of challenge your ideas and keep moving forward. It doesn't mean your idea is completely wrong, but it might mean that, you see the other side of things, because there's often we live in a gray area as human beings, right? There's two sides to every story, and the the answer is probably somewhere in the middle, and we kind of need to kind of find that and explore it a little bit.
Yeah, and if you haven't had to, if you think something or believe something and you haven't ever had to think critically about that, I mean, you could end up still believing that, but it could strengthen your belief because now you've had to examine it critically from someone who thinks differently, and really have to go through a process to like, oh yeah, no, this is why I believe that, and why I think it's true. And yeah.
Yeah, absolutely. And I suppose with a kind of a engineering background, I suppose you have to, you have to think critically about lots of stuff to kind of figure stuff out, especially work wise, and that probably translates into the rest of your life then, right?
Yeah, to some extent. I know I'm yeah, you're always wanting to look for the proof, and there's uh, that what's the saying? Figures don't lie, but liars can figure. So like I was just looking at a statistic last night. I'm reading a interesting book, and it was showing two graphs: crime rates in the U.S. over the last, I don't know, 20, 30 years, and then the number of people that think crime is getting worse. And at least according to their figures, um, people think crime's getting worse, but it's really not if you look at the statistics. But I was interested because the st- the statistics they were using for crimes was number of reported crimes in the US. And over 30 years, I'm going, okay, so the number of crimes is going down, but the population's going up. So it could be that the number of crimes per person is even going up or the same. Now, so of course I, check the numbers and no, the crimes per person are still going down, but it just makes you, I think it makes you skeptical. You want to see the proof, it's like, because you can, I mean, you probably know, I mean, you can take a bunch of numbers and depending on which numbers you use and which time frame you use, I mean, you can show a lot of different things. I always remember in high school, I had a course, I had an English class. It was Miss Wexler. Miss Wexler was old. And I mean, I was only like 16, but she was old. And I knew she was old because I had another class with a different teacher, Mr. Jacobs, and he had had English from Miss Wexler in that high school when he was a kid. So it was like, she's been there a long time. But one thing I always remember, I forget, it was a course in, I think, journalism or something. And we really looked at the words that they use to report a story. And it's like, you're not changing the facts, but the words that you use create different pictures in people's mind and lend different meanings to, if you call something a riot or an insurrection, for instance, um, or disturbance, it creates different visual images of the same event. So, yeah, it's just something I look for.
Yeah, that's interesting actually, and that is right. And you can spin things with words so easily, and use use statistics, even statistics if they're not kind of. Some people don't understand statistics and how they work, or how how to take into account the other factors that maybe that that statistic doesn't account for, because often there are multiple factors that kind of account for stuff, and people just look blankly at a figure and go, oh no, things are bad, things are worse, when you haven't actually looked at, actually, there's been three, four other things that have contributed to this that are not normal, and that that's been what's affected the number. But people don't look at that. They just look at this figure is now worse. Everything is awful.
Yeah, and that would be something, if we're talking about, which we weren't, but like what to teach kids in school. I mean, some kind of, like, instead of teaching them to memorize stuff, probably if you could teach them how to critically think about things, that could be useful.
Yeah, they're supposed to do that in university, aren't they? To a degree, at least. I think, especially if you go into kind of the scientific realm, you will get that element, I suppose. But you are right; they should do it in high school and everywhere else.
Yeah, definitely. Because I think it's something everyone probably needs. We'd all be better off if we did a little more critical thinking and didn't blindly accept stuff.
Yeah, and I think we'd be more open to other people's ideas and stuff there as well, because we'd look at them objectively rather than just kind of point blank going, "No, I already think this."
Yeah, it doesn't fit what I think about something. And yeah,
Yeah, because the other issue is you get that confirmation bias where you believe something so strongly that you just look for evidence to fit what you believe, and then you just use that, yeah, and you disregard everything else.
yeah,
So, but we could talk for hours on schools, though, Glenn. I tell you, because there's a lot that they don't teach that I think they should teach, and like general life skills, things that will be better for you throughout life than kind of just memorizing things, like you say.
that's true. I know I was never good at memorizing stuff. I remember my mom grilling me on the times tables. Um, because obviously I wasn't getting, she was worried about me graduating from fourth grade or third grade or whatever it was when we were second grade, when we learned times tables. And I'm okay with times tables, but I was never like as, quick as my peers.
Yeah, I was middle of the road in school. To be fair, I wasn't excellent at anything particularly. I was just the grey man faded into the background, just trying to survive, do my time and get out of there.
Well, I did do well in school. I mean, I graduated, I think seventh in my class in high school and graduated from college summa cum laude and picked with an engineering degree and picked up a master's in business. So I kind of figured school out, but Wasn't always easy.
Yeah, I get that. Were you good at writing in school and stuff? Because obviously you've written a book now. Is that something that you were kind of interested in school? Did you kind of get a bit of a passion for it or not?
No, I wasn't really much of a writer in school, and I mean, yes, I wrote a book, so technically I'm a writer, um, award-winning writer. My PR people instruct me to say because it's won a couple of awards, but um, yeah, I don't consider myself a writer. It's not like writing is my mission. I have all this stuff inside that I need to share with the world. Um, to me, it's just a means of expression. And when you're an engineer and you like solving problems and figuring things out, and what are the formulas you need, and you know what are the properties of things that you can use to solve the problem. I realized that everything I wanted to do in life was going to involve other people. And so I needed to get better at working with other people. And that involves, leadership skills, management skills, public speaking skills, and writing skills. So I did pay some attention to writing, although I feel like the best way to be a better writer is to read a lot, read people who are good writers. Cause I don't know, that's how you like. I never took any courses in writing, but if you read stuff, you kind of get a sense of how good writing flows. And I don't know. Um, so I think that's probably the most, in my experience, helpful thing is reading interesting books, and then you could write a better one.
Yeah, I suppose you can pick up a lot from books, especially because you can read some books and they just don't grip you, and you just can't. No matter how much you try, you just can't get through it. So you have to, the ones that you do read and you do complete, I suppose, will all have a way of keeping your interest, but yeah, in the way that it's written. Because even the books that I've put down that I can't manage to read because they just can't get hold of me, they usually have a good storyline or a good, if it's a non-fiction, it's a good information in there that I want to consume. It's just really struggling to get it consumed, really, I suppose, because of the way that it's being communicated to me.
Yeah. So if you analyze, and if you're an engineer, you're always analyzing, the books that you do enjoy. It's like, well, what, it was good information, but yeah, they strung it along through stories, and there was like an overall story that they kept coming back to, and then little individual stories on particular aspects, and that's what made it interesting. So that's I've tried to do some of that in my book.
Yeah, how did you go about writing your book then, Glenn? Did you have like a plan? Did you just go like, right, I'm just going to sit down and write for X amount of hours a day, or how did you kind of get through the whole process?
So I cheated. I had a collaborator, ghostwriter, mostly, and I'd never done this, so I didn't know how this was going to work. I thought at a minimum, they would help provide some structure and deadlines. So it's like, okay, we're going to meet in 2 weeks. I got to, focus and crank this out. Um, but the way it worked for me, and I don't know if this is typical, is we had a lot of conversations. Um, I mean, kind of like we're having. I mean, and she would draw out stories, and then it was a matter of kind of pulling some themes together from the stories, and which stories support which themes, and how we're going to organize it. And we went through some major changes, and then of course when the publisher got a hold of it, they exed a lot of stuff. And even as I read it now, it's like, probably needed like half the number of chapters that we got, but it's done.
Yeah, fair one. It's what are the themes in your book? What kind of do you cover throughout the book then?
Well, the broadly, I mean, the title is Take Less, Do More: Surprising Life Lessons in uh, Generosity, Gratitude, and Curiosity from an ultralight backpacker. And so it's the story in the 50 years that I worked to lower my base pack weight. for backpacking, I learned a bunch of lessons that I thought had broader applicability to life in general. Um, so obviously, there are broad themes of generosity, gratitude, and curiosity. Um, but there are 15 chapters or lessons, we call them, but there's considerable overlap in those. um, and actually I'm working on a couple of study guides to use with the book, and so I actually just have to go through for I'm doing one now for book clubs, because I've had a number of book clubs select this book. Oftentimes they're not backpackers. I don't know where they find it. um, and one was super interesting. It was a stay-at-home dads group. There's a national stay-at-home dads. So these are fathers that, for whatever reason, and they vary because I asked them at the end of the book club meeting on Zoom, um, decide that it works better for them for the husband to be the dad to be the one to stay at home, and the mom works, for different reasons, all of them reasonable reasons, I thought. But anyway, so I'm working on one for a book club. So I kind of had to go through and create kind of, I came up with 6 general kind of life lesson themes in the book. One is to be generous, one is uh, to be grateful, create margin in your life, invest in relationships, take risks, learn from failure, and then kind of curiosity or stay yes, remain open to new opportunities.
Yeah, I like that. It's quite a lot of topics there I'm quite interested in. I'm going to jump on the learning from failure one first, though, Glenn. So learning from failure is huge, right? I've worked in a lot of organizations that are very critical of people and don't allow people that kind of rope, I would say, to that room to fail. So, and personally, I think that's a bad thing. I think we all need a bit of space to fail, and we all need to kind of stumble and fall a little bit to kind of learn and progress in life. So, how have your life kind of affected? How have you learned from failure as you've gone through life and work and just personal life in general? I suppose.
It's interesting. I was listening to one of your other podcasts, and the guest was talking about how in most workplaces, or maybe you were saying this, that might have been you. Um, they like people to be generalists, to like, you know, do everything, and you or the guest weren't sure that made a lot of sense. Like, like I'm really good at this, and Joe is really good at the other thing. Like, let Joe do that. That's what he likes. That's what lights him up. And why make me do something that I don't like to do and I'm not very good at, frankly. And I it reminded me as I was listening to it of when I had my own engineering company. I would tell people, um, okay, you're going to do a lot of what you're good at, because that makes the company money, which pays all of our bills. Um, I said, then you're going to do some of what you're not good at, maybe not quite so good at, because that expands your capabilities. And that's important for your future, um, to broaden your skill set. And that's good for the company too. And then I would tell them, you're going to do a little bit of what you know nothing about, um, because you might discover something that you really like or you're really good at, but you wouldn't have tried because you don't know anything about it. So that was like my standard speech I'd always, give to new hires, set their expectations. Um,
Yeah.
yeah, I think in it's so important to be able to fail. I mean, someone said, if you're not failing, you're not trying hard enough. You're not really pushing yourself if you're not failing. No one likes to fail, I assume. Um, but if you're afraid of failing, it'll paralyze you, and you just don't try anything new. Um, And sometimes it's important not to like have everything figured out. um, as long as you know the next steps, like, oh, I'll take that next step, and I'll sew myself a pack and see what happens and see where it goes from there.
Yeah, I think I do think it's important to have that kind of. I think it comes down to kind of psychological safety in the workplace, feeling like it's okay for you to try things, or it's okay for you to kind of, you know, well, fail. I suppose it's okay to make mistakes, and I think if you don't feel that way, then I think that's going to just bring you a lot of stress, and actually, it's going to affect your work negatively because you're so afraid to fail that you're going to kind of shut everything down and kind of do the bare minimum just to survive, really.
Yeah, and that's, I mean, such a sad way to live. I mean, I had excuse me, I had a employee when I worked for the city who worked the front counter, and she would come back into my office and say, "Hey, we've got this resident or developer at the counter, and he's asking, he wants to do, ABC, and what do you think?" And so I asked her, "Well, okay, if you hadn't been able to find me, if I hadn't been in my office, what would you have told him?" And she would go, "Well, this part of the code says this, and I think if you interpret this section of the code like that, that, you know, et cetera, et cetera." And I go, "That's a great answer. Tell him that." And after 3 or 4 times, she realized that she knew plenty and that I would back her up if she made a mistake. There was one thing I saw, and this is probably true in companies. It was certainly true in government. Um, we had someone pulled a building permit without paying some fee, a traffic impact fee or something. And, it's like $50,000 or some big amount. And of course, everyone's panicking because it's always easier to get fees paid when you have something they want. They need their building permit to start work. So I said, "Don't worry about it. It's not a big deal. We will get the money. I mean, there's still plenty of stuff they need. They need inspections, they need finals, they need, don't worry about it." And they start talking about, well, we need a new system where, there's another check before we issue permits. It goes around and it takes, another week. I go, whoa, whoa, whoa. No, no, no. We don't create new rules because one thing went wrong. It's like if it goes wrong 3 or 4 times, like, okay, we'll consider it, but you never add more regulation and process for something that happens once ever, because that's how things get crazy. I mean, that's people go crazy about bureaucracies because every rule, I guarantee it, something went wrong once, and that's why there's that rule. And that might have been the only time it went wrong.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's just such a reactive way to look at things, isn't it? And it just kind of holds everything back. I'm not a huge fan of that.
Yeah.
Like you say, in government work, it tends to be like that a lot.
Yeah. Working for the government, because I always worked on private side and then ended up working for the city. And it did give me a new appreciation. And I know in the US right now, we're on a big, everybody hates government and bureaucracy and regulation. Um, but it gave me a different appreciation working on the inside, so to speak. Um, and there's no, if you're working in government, there's no upside for like taking a risk and making something easier, because if something goes wrong, you're the first one that gets blamed. It's like no one backs you up. If you issue a building permit because they're bugging you about too much regulation, it takes too long, and then they forget to put in a fire alarm and there's a fire and people die. The first one they come to is like, how could you allow them to move in without this being done properly? So, there's no upside for being flexible and creative if you're in government, because you're the first one they blame. So,
Yeah, you just get hung out to dry, unfortunately, a lot of the time.
yeah, yeah, and no one wants to hear it if something bad happens. Is, well, we were trying to be flexible. We're trying to create more housing, or we were trying to speed the process. It's like, so there's a happy medium in there, and trying to make sure things are safe enough and pretty enough, but don't take forever.
Yeah, it's a tough balance, I suppose, to get right. But you know, I I think whatever the government do, the government will get it in the neck anyway, regardless, one way or another.
Yeah, I mean, my saying was, hey, we're going to be firm on results. We'll be flexible on process, because I think a lot of times government gets hung up on the process. It's like, these are the steps you got to go, dot, 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 dot. And instead I go, like, we want, it has to be right. It has to be quality, but how we get there, we can be flexible.
Yeah, and I think it can get lost sometimes, especially if people don't understand the bigger picture and they get so drawn in on the process with government and stuff, rather than because it's not run like business, where business is all about the outcome, really, isn't it? It's about what you're producing at the end, and profit usually,
Yeah. Yeah.
whereas you don't get
And
that
it's
kind
a,
of drive in government.
no, that's true. And it's a different outcome. I mean, it always amuses me when people say, I'm going to run the city more like a business. They're successful businessmen. It's like, well, okay, but the city isn't a business. If you're a business, you just have to represent your shareholders or your customers. The city, you represent everybody who lives there and works there. It's a different situation. It's not a business. And sure, you can apply some of the, I mean, I've worked in government, I've worked in big companies, and I've worked in my own companies. And you can certainly apply some of the efficiencies and some of the concepts, um, but it's fundamentally different.
Yeah, and I suppose no matter which government department you work for, that government department has kind of one goal, but it also ties into the bigger overall picture of government as well, and the other conflicting interests a lot of the time of other government agencies and what's happening. So there's a balance to be had as well, because you're not just trying to sort housing out. The government are doing all these other things that has to also fit in with everything else.
Yeah, and you see that in big companies too. I mean, I could always tell uh, when I mean, the sales team, I mean, they're just trying to sell stuff, and then the legal department is like, whoa, 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 we got to make sure we don't get sued on this, and then HR is like, hey, you can't really say that. I mean, all the different departments have different segments that they're looking for, and different responsibilities, but yeah.
Absolutely. You mentioned gratitude as well, Glenn. How important is gratitude to you?
I, I mean, I think gratitude is key, and that's one thing about, I think, a lesson from wilderness. When you go out into the wilderness and you spend a week or a month or several months, sleeping on the dirt, shivering in the cold, tromping through the rain, slogging, as you would say, um, gives you a new appreciation for all the conveniences we have in our home lives. I mean, if you have glitchy internet or your dog's bark or something, it's like, that's annoying, But it's like, on the grand scheme of things, when you've been like wondering if you have enough fuel to cook your dinner out in the middle of nowhere, or you sprain something and wonder if you can get out, um, or your bugs are eating you alive and you're out of bug repellent, or you didn't bring a head net. You're wondering, the water source you thought was there wasn't there, and you're wondering if you can make the half liter work for another 10 kilometers, and if there's going to be water at that point. Suddenly when you're home and it's like, wow, I don't have to treat my water. I can just drink it right out of the tap, and I can get it any temperature I want. Um, I don't, if it's raining, you said it's miserable there right now. It's like, yeah, okay, well, that's inconvenient to look at, but you're not trying to set up a tent in it. So yeah, I think, wilderness time is great for resetting your gratitude and kind of changing your perspective on what you need in life. Like, you realize like how little you need. Like, you were talking about your bike ride, and even though there was certainly hardship. It was a great experience. Um, and so you realize that you don't need a lot of stuff to be happy and content and have a good time. It's not the stuff that creates that.
Yeah, absolutely. Do you go to really remote places then, Glenn?
Um, I mean, I go to places where your cell phone doesn't work. So, of course, my cell phone doesn't work very well in my home office. So that's not probably a great, a great, a great illustration. Um, but yeah, I mean, I go places. There's a expression that when you go into the wilderness, you're only three bad decisions away from not coming out alive. Um, so it's those kind of places. It's like generally you can survive one bad decision or two bad decisions, but if you make too many bad decisions, it's like those articles you read that somebody who died in the woods is like, well, okay, they didn't have their knife, and then they didn't have water treatment, and then they didn't have enough insulation, so they got too cold, and then they died. So it's like three bad decisions. So I don't know, particularly remote. I mean, we live in the Western United States, so there's a lot of remote land, which is something I really like about the West. I think it's why I consider myself a Westerner. Even our East Coast is just different. It's more like Europe. I've done a bunch of hiking in Europe and I enjoy it a lot. But, when you're hiking in the mountains, there's cows there and sheep and they're cutting down the trees because that's what you need to do to, every piece of land has to pay its way when you're in a small country that's been lived in for tens of thousands of years. So I really enjoy the just being able to get out to where you can't see or hear anyone.
Yeah, nice. You said you've been to Europe. Have you been to Japan as well?
Yeah, we've been to Japan.
How was
I don't know,
Japan?
three times I think. We
Yeah.
love Japan. I mean, we have some good friends there now, um, and we were in Tokyo last year. And I'm not really a city person. Um, I don't know how people live in cities. It just seems stressful to me. But France and I were walking around Tokyo, and I thought, if you had to live in a city, it's like it's clean, it's safe. There's trains that go everywhere. I could probably live in Tokyo. I mean, it wouldn't be my first choice, but um, I was actually talking to someone, our gear company, one of our Chinese distributor was over here, and he was talking. He's Taiwanese, but spent time in the States, I think in college or something, and was talking to his uh, partner, and she's mainland Chinese and grew up there. And he's like explained the differences between, and I was curious because you know, freedom is like our big thing here in the US. It's like freedom above all. And we put up with things for freedom. And so I'm, just curious because in my mind, like China is like, not so much freedom. So what is it like on a day to day for just some guy who's has a small business in China? And he said, well, the trade off is like, it doesn't affect me much. It's like, yeah, you can't criticize the government. It's like that doesn't go well for you. Um, but he says in exchange, it's like I can walk around any city in China any time of night and be perfectly safe. It's like in the U.S., not so much. Um, so it's just interesting the trade offs we make. I forget how we got off on that, but um,
Yeah, it's quite interesting actually, isn't it? Because like I've never really thought about it because obviously the UK is relatively closely aligned with the US, and we kind of live a lot of the same ways and by the same rules, and definitely have a democratic society and all that. But you never really think about how it is to live in China or Russia or places like that where they use communism. Where I'm sure there's plenty of people who are very happy with it.
yeah, I mean I can see. there's trade-offs, and you have, I mean, I think the standard of living would be one trade-off. I mean, I believe there's ample evidence that freedom, like economic freedom in particular, um, and capitalism over time generate, the highest standards of living. Um, but you see things like, uh, controlling the internet. It's like, okay, well, we would say that's a bad thing. Um, but, not having child pornography is like, okay, well, that would be a good thing, in my opinion. I guess if you're a pedophile, that would be a bad thing. But uh, I I don't know, I mean, there's trade-offs, and we don't really, I guess we do make those trade-offs, but in generally we kind of err on the side of freedom, and can someone make a buck off it? Then that's a good thing.
Yeah, it's an interesting one, and I've very much I've grown up with the freedom and being able to kind
Yeah.
of do what you want and explore different things, have make your own money or whatever else. So I don't think I could go into communism now, having lived the way I've lived. I don't think I think it's more difficult to go that way than it is to come the other way, right?
It could be, although, it could be the freedom would be overwhelming, if you're used to like someone telling you what to do. And if you do that, you got an okay life. And I don't know. I'm just curious, like you say, I mean, I've grown up in the US my whole life and had my own businesses, and, um, been able to say what I wanted to say to who I wanted to say pretty much. So it's just the water I swim in, like you, but I'm always curious because I mean, we consume what our free press says about China, and I'm always be fascinated. Just I want to go talk to a civil engineer over in China. Like, what's it like? You just, you go to work, you do a thing, raise a family, buy a car, buy a house. It's like, maybe 90% of the life kind of looks the same as it does here. I don't know.
Yeah, and the problem is with listening to our press because they don't have free press out there, and they get shut them down and won't let them go out there. They're gonna have bad opinions, aren't they?
Yeah, yeah. So yeah, I don't know. It's interesting.
Yeah, fair one. Um, Talking about capitalism, then, Glenn, tell me a little bit about your business.
Well, I've had a number of businesses. I had my own engineering company for a long time. Um, and then I accidentally started a gear company along the way. That was just a side thing. I never took a salary from it. Um, but, when you know how to make stuff, especially in, I think, these days of AI, that's going to be more. I have a theory that, up until now, it's kind of been the knowledge workers been top of the pile. They're the ones with the nice cars and big houses if you know how to code a computer. And I think in, call it 10 years, 20 years, it's going to be the electricians and the plumbers. They're going to be ruling the world because, if your sink breaks, it's like, yeah, AI is not going to fix that for you. And someone in India is not going to fix that for you. You need some dude at your door fixing it. But so I've been lucky to have my business and have businesses and work for other people. And I'm always amused when someone says, I have to be my own boss because I can never work for anyone else. And it's like, hey, you're always working for someone else. Like if it's your company, it's like not only you're working for your clients, you got to make them happy and get new clients. You're working for your employees. I mean, that's way more. That's like if you're working for a boss, like you just need to make the boss happy pretty much. I mean, that's easy. Working for yourself, that's hard. Being the boss. Um, so yeah, I've done that in a couple different renditions. I had an engineering company, and then I did consulting to the city where I lived. So I've had a pretty varied varied career.
Yeah, it's tougher than people think to run a business, especially if you've got staff. Looking after staff it can be difficult, and especially when their livelihood depends on you and your success, and driving things forward. And then, like you say, you've got clients who you got to, that's ultimately who you are serving as a company. So it's people think, I think, that if I went to work for myself, I could just do what I want all the time, but it doesn't work that way.
No, so I wash dishes part time at a local bakery here, and that story is in the book. Um, but I had occasionally some of the other people who work there will, look at that old guy washing dishes, and they know he's got a couple patents, he's started a couple companies, guy's got something going on besides washing dishes, and so sometimes I get asked for advice. So I was meeting with this gal who was a baker there, and we went out for coffee, and she says, "Yeah, I really like baking. I'm really good at it. So I want to open my own bakery." And I said, "Well, that could be great, but understand that owning and running a bakery is about a way lot more than baking. You got to hire people, you got to do marketing, you got to know something about a website, you've got to learn about property and leasing and sourcing ingredients, and you're running a business which is entirely different than whatever the business is, entirely different than baking." And so she says, "Oh yeah, I never thought about that." So it's like, I mean, she ended up doing it. um, I think she's on to her art now, which was her other kind of interest. But yeah, it's a whole different, running a business is different than whatever. And I like the engineering, I like solving the problems, but I also enjoy the business of business. I mean, I enjoy the challenge of, you know, getting clients and collecting from those clients after you do the work and meeting the deadlines and, what works to build a business. So I enjoy that aspect of it too. So,
Yeah, there's a lot goes into it. There's a lot goes into running a business, and it's not just the skill. And you find that with a lot of small businesses, they're really good at the skill, the output, but be it bakery or plumbing, wherever it might be, they're really good at that skill. But then all these other things that come along with it, can be really difficult, right? Especially like marketing, accounting, all that kind of stuff comes really, really can be a challenge, and it can take your love away for the actual thing that you got into it for in the first place.
yeah, and that's one reason. So I never, the gear business, I started Gossamer Gear just as a side thing. Um, and um, I think the standard seems like story is that you start something on the side and then you build it up and then you quit your main job to do like podcasting full time in your case. Um, and I certainly know people that have done that with starting gear companies and gone full time. And I never wanted to do that because I wanted to keep the fun in it. Um, I wanted to make what I wanted to make without worrying about what people wanted to buy. Um, and so not relying on that for any money allowed me to the freedom to keep it fun. I think of someone who plays music. I mean, I've talked to people who, they were hikers and they had this idea and then they started this company, and then a couple years later they're not hiking anymore because they're too busy running the company. And so, it became it took them away from what they really like to do. Um, and so I think a valid option is to keep the side hustle a side hustle. Don't look to make it the main thing, and you may get more joy out of it. Maybe you're a musician and you play weekends at some place, or you make music and put it on wherever people put music these days. And you want to make that your full-time gig, and that may not be as much fun as you think. Maybe more fun just doing it on the side.
Yeah, I think the thing is as well, when you do take something on full time and it's your business, you don't just leave it at the door. When it's a job, you can just kind of leave it at the door and forget about it for the evening or the weekend, wherever it may be, or when you got 2 weeks on holiday or whatever it is. Whereas when it's yours, you're always thinking about it, always worrying about it, always got issues going on that you're trying to solve.
Yeah, well, and that's true. You talked about people that want to be their own boss and do whatever they want. It's like, yeah, well, if the boss is another person, you can leave them at the office. When you're the boss, like you're always with the boss.
Absolutely. Glenn, you mentioned your book earlier. Where can people find that?
It's available anywhere books are sold. I mean, online, Amazon or Barnes and Noble. If people want, well, I should say, if people live in the U.S. and they want a signed copy, they can contact me through my website. I'm happy to do that. Um, and then your local bookstore, at least in the U.S., can always order it for you also.
Cool. And where can people kind of connect with you if they want to connect with you, learn a bit more about you, or just kind of have some questions that they want to throw your way?
Probably the easiest is on my website, glenvanpeski.com. I've got tips and tricks on there. I've got gear lists. I've got a blog post that I do every couple of weeks. People can sign up for my newsletter. I've got some video up there. So that would be the easiest place. I'm semi active on LinkedIn and Instagram. So people can follow me there.
No problem. I'll make sure I follow you there as well. We'll connect on there. Before we go and I bring this kind of episode to land, Glenn, do you have any final thoughts or messages that you want to leave people with?
I don't know. People ask sometimes, do I have one thing I want people to know or take away from the book? Um, and the thing is that the book isn't some masterful, miraculous discovery of what works in life. I mean, there are a million books out there. Um, but what I found is that people hear things in different ways and hear them at different times in their life. And so, my hope with the book is, and seems to be turning out that way from the feedback I get, that, the stories I've told and the words I've used are connecting with some people at the right time in their life, that gives them some different ways of looking at things, some hacks, if you will, that can increase the joy and meaning and purpose in their lives.
I like that. And ultimately, that's, if you reach one person and help one person, then you've done something quite special. So it's nice that people are reaching out and telling you how that book is affecting them.
Yeah, it's fascinating to me now. The book's been out, came out April of 24. Um, it's something different for everyone, but there are things that come up multiple times, so that's interesting to me.
Yeah, it's always nice to hear, right, when you get that kind of positive feedback that you're on the right
Yeah,
track, sort of thing.
yeah, I'm glad that some people are finding it useful, so that's good.
No worries. Glenn, it's been a pleasure having you on the show. I really appreciate you taking the time to talk to us today. So thank you very much.
Likewise, I enjoyed the freewheeling conversation.
No worries. Thank you. Take care.
Okay, you too.